Kevin Hart had made millions laugh about being short his entire career. But on this Tuesday afternoon in Atlanta, when the Family Feud cameras were rolling and 300 people were watching, Kevin Hart stopped laughing, and when Steve Harvey heard why, he broke down completely and gave Kevin something that changed both their lives forever. The Celebrity Family Feud special was supposed to be routine. Kevin Hart's team versus Tiffany Haddish's team, both comedy powerhouses bringing their A-game to the iconic blue and gold stage. The audience was electric, phones recording every moment, expecting nothing but pure entertainment. The studio lights cast their familiar warm glow across the polished floor, reflecting off the pristine Family Feud logo that had witnessed countless moments of joy, surprise, and occasional heartbreak. Steve Harvey, resplendent in his charcoal gray suit with a burgundy tie that complemented his confident stride, was in his element. This was his domain, his stage, where he had perfected the art of balancing humor with humanity for over a decade. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Celebrity Family Feud. Steve's voice boomed across the studio. I'm your host, Steve Harvey, and today we have a battle of the comedy giants. Kevin Hart bounced onto the stage with his signature energy, all 5'4" of pure charisma. His team consisted of his wife, Aniko, elegant and supportive as always, his longtime friend and comedian Lil Rel, whose loyalty had been tested through years of Hollywood's ups and downs, actress Regina King, whose respect Kevin had earned through mutual admiration, and surprisingly, his teenage daughter Heaven, whose presence added a layer of vulnerability Kevin hadn't anticipated. The audience erupted as Kevin did his trademark animated entrance, arms pumping, smile infectious, but there was something in his daughter's eyes, a mixture of pride and protective concern that only a child can have for a parent they're watching perform their pain. Steve, my man, Kevin called out, jogging up to the podium with exaggerated swagger, his voice carrying that familiar rapid-fire cadence that had made him millions. You ready for this? Because we about to show Tiffany's team what real comedy looks like. We got the dream team over here, Steve. We got loyalty, we got talent, and we got, he paused, glancing at his daughter, we got family. But something was different about Kevin today. Those who knew him well might have noticed the slight hesitation in his usual rapid-fire delivery, the way his eyes didn't quite hold their usual spark. Steve Harvey, with his decades of experience reading people, caught it immediately. Kevin Hart, everybody? Steve announced. But his seasoned host instincts were already picking up on an undercurrent he couldn't quite place. Now, Kevin, I gotta ask you something that's been on everybody's mind. Oh no, here we go, Kevin interrupted with a forced laugh, playing to the crowd. Let me guess, you gonna talk about my height, right? Real original, Steve. The audience laughed, but Steve paused. For just a moment, he saw something flicker across Kevin's face, something that looked almost like pain. The game began normally. Round 1 was standard Family Feud fare. Name something people do when they're nervous. Kevin's team dominated, with answers like bite their nails and pace around. Kevin was on form, cracking jokes about each response. But Steve noticed something. Every joke Kevin made somehow circled back to being small, being overlooked, being underestimated. Survey says, fidget with their hands, Steve announced, as another answer appeared on the board. Good answer, Aniko. Kevin, your wife knows her stuff. She better, Kevin shot back. She's gotta know everything, because she's the one who can reach the top shelf in our house. The audience roared, but Steve felt that familiar pang in his chest. He'd spent years making jokes about his own insecurities before realizing they were really just cries for validation. Round 2 brought them to fast money, and Kevin was at the podium facing off against Tiffany Haddish. The category appeared on the board. Name something that makes a person feel powerful. Money, Kevin shouted immediately. Survey says, Steve paused dramatically. Number 1 answer. Kevin Hart, you're on a roll. But then came the second question that would change everything. Name something about yourself that you would never change. Kevin's smile faltered for just a split second. In that moment of hesitation, the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. Kevin had built his entire career on making fun of his height, turning his perceived weakness into his greatest strength. But now, faced with this simple question, he seemed lost. My Kevin started, then stopped. His usual quick wit had abandoned him. My sense of humor? The answer wasn't wrong, but it wasn't Kevin. Steve knew it, the audience sensed it, and most importantly, Kevin felt it. Survey says. The answer appeared. Sense of humor was indeed on the board, but only number 5. That's on the board, Kevin, but we need something bigger. What about yourself would you never ever change? Kevin looked out at the audience, then at his team, then at his daughter Heaven, who was watching him with the kind of intense focus that only comes when a child senses their parent is about to reveal something important. For 38 years, Kevin had been the shortest person in almost every room he entered. For 38 years, he had turned that fact into fuel, into material, into a career worth millions. But standing there, under the bright lights, with his daughter watching and Steve Harvey waiting for an answer, Kevin Hart realized he had spent so much time making jokes about his body that he had forgotten to love the person inside it. And that's when it happened. Kevin Hart, the man who had made a fortune out of being small, looked Steve Harvey directly in the eyes and said the words that would haunt the studio for the next 20 minutes. Honestly, Steve, I don't know if there's anything. The words hung in the air like a confession that had been waiting years to escape. In that moment, Kevin wasn't a comedian, wasn't a movie star, wasn't a brand. He was just a man who had spent decades deflecting his deepest pain with punchlines, suddenly faced with a question that demanded truth instead of humor. The studio fell silent. 300 people, 2 camera crews, a live studio audience, and millions watching at home, all waiting to see what happened when comedy's toughest exterior finally cracked. Steve Harvey had been hosting game shows for decades. He'd seen contestants freeze, break down, get overwhelmed, but he'd never seen someone reveal their deepest insecurities so nakedly, so publicly. Kevin wasn't making a joke. He wasn't setting up a punchline. He was just honest. Kevin, Steve said softly, abandoning his usual booming host voice. What did you just say? Kevin tried to recover. I mean, maybe I'd be taller so I could finally ride all the rides at Six Flags without needing a step stool. But the damage was done. The laugh felt forced, hollow. The audience gave a polite chuckle, but the energy had shifted completely. Steve Harvey made a decision that would define his career. He had been in television long enough to know that some moments are bigger than the show, more important than the ratings, more valuable than the entertainment. He thought about his own journey, his own moments of feeling inadequate, his own years of using humor as armor against a world that seemed designed to make him feel small. He put down his cards, stepped away from his podium, and walked directly to Kevin. Kevin, can you come here for a second? Steve, what are you doing? We're in the middle of the game. Kevin's voice carried a note of panic, the fear of someone who had built their entire identity around control of their narrative. The game can wait. This is more important than any game. Can you come here? Kevin, confused and suddenly vulnerable in a way he'd never been on television, walked over to Steve. The cameras kept rolling. The audience was transfixed, and somewhere in the control room, producers were frantically wondering if they should cut to commercial. But this wasn't the kind of moment you cut away from. This was the kind of moment that reminded everyone why television could still be magical. Steve Harvey, all 6'2" of him, looked down at Kevin Hart and did something unprecedented. He began to unbutton his suit jacket, the same ritual he had performed thousands of times before, but never with such purpose. Kevin, you see this jacket? Yeah, Steve, it's a nice jacket. Armani, right? Can we get back to the game? Kevin's attempt at deflection was transparent, desperate. This jacket is made for a big man. 6'2", broad shoulders, takes up space. You know what that means? Kevin shook his head, genuinely confused, his usual quick wit abandoned in favor of simple human curiosity. It means it's got room for a giant heart. And you, Kevin Hart, you got the biggest heart I've ever seen. You've spent years making people laugh about being small, but let me tell you something that I wish someone had told me when I was struggling with my own insecurities. Steve Harvey knelt down on one knee, bringing himself to Kevin's eye level in front of 300 people on national television. You are not small. You are not less than. You are not a joke. You are Kevin Hart, and you have brought more joy to this world than most people twice your size ever will. Kevin's eyes began to well up. Steve, you don't have to,
Yes, I do.
because I see you, man. I see you carrying all this weight, all these insecurities, turning your pain into punchlines so other people don't have to deal with your truth. But your truth is beautiful, Kevin. Your truth is that you're enough exactly as you are. Steve handed Kevin the jacket. This jacket is too big for you, Kevin. But you know what? You're gonna grow into it. Not physically, you're gonna fill it with all the love and talent and heart that you already have, because that's what makes a man big. Not his height, his heart. The studio was silent, except for the sound of 300 people collectively holding their breath, and the quiet sobs coming from Kevin's family in the front row. Kevin took the jacket with trembling hands. Steve, you what, Kevin, tell me? And then Kevin Hart, for the first time in his adult life, told the truth about his height without making it a joke. I was 8 years old when kids started calling me names. Shorty, tiny, half pint. I went home crying to my mom every day, asking why God made me so small. She told me that good things come in small packages. But Steve, Kevin's voice broke. I never felt like a good thing. I felt like a mistake. Steve stood up and gently placed his hands on Kevin's shoulders. Kevin, look around this room. Look at all these people. You see anybody laughing at you right now? Kevin looked around the studio. The audience was crying. His wife Aniko was sobbing. His daughter Heaven had tears streaming down her face. Even Tiffany Haddish, his competitor, was wiping her eyes. No, Kevin whispered. That's because they're not seeing Kevin Hart the comedian right now. They're seeing Kevin Hart the man, the father, the husband, the person who has spent his entire life making other people feel better about themselves by sacrificing his own self-worth. And that man, Kevin, that man is a giant. Steve Harvey turned to the audience. I want everybody in this studio to stand up. Slowly, all 300 people rose to their feet. I want you to give this man the standing ovation he's deserved his entire life. Not for being funny, not for being short, but for being brave enough to tell the truth about who he really is. The applause that followed wasn't the polite game show clapping the audience was used to. It was thunderous, sustained, emotional. It went on for 5 full minutes. Kevin Hart stood in the center of that storm of appreciation, wearing Steve Harvey's oversized jacket, crying openly for the first time in decades. When the applause finally died down, Steve had one more thing to do. Kevin, I want you to keep that jacket. But more than that, I want you to remember what it represents. Every time you look in the mirror and think you're too small, I want you to remember that 300 people and millions of viewers saw the real you today, and we didn't see someone small. We saw someone enormous. Kevin hugged the jacket to his chest. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting us see you. The show resumed, but everything had changed. The atmosphere in the studio felt different, charged with an emotional electricity that no script could have generated. Kevin played the rest of the game differently, looser, more authentic, making jokes that didn't deprecate himself but celebrated the moment they'd just shared. When he gave an answer, he wasn't performing for the audience, he was sharing with them. His family watched from the sidelines with tears still fresh on their cheeks, seeing perhaps for the first time the Kevin Hart who existed beyond the punchlines. His team won the game, but that wasn't what anyone would remember. They would remember the moment when entertainment stopped and humanity began. After taping wrapped, the studio slowly emptied, but the emotional residue of what had happened lingered in the air like incense after a religious service. Kevin approached Steve in the hallway backstage, still wearing the oversized jacket that had become both symbol and shield. Steve, I need you to know something. What you did out there. Kevin's voice was different now, quieter, more deliberate. The rapid-fire delivery that had made him famous was replaced by something more precious, honesty. I've been in therapy for 3 years trying to work through this stuff. Trying to separate Kevin Hart, the performer, from Kevin Hart, the person. You did more for me in 10 minutes than I've accomplished in 3 years of sessions. Steve smiled, the kind of smile that reaches all the way to the soul. Kevin, you had all that healing inside you already. Sometimes we just need someone to give us permission to let it out. Sometimes we need someone to remind us that our scars don't define our worth. Can I ask you something? Why did you do it? Why did you stop the show? Steve Harvey thought for a moment. Because I saw myself 20 years ago, making jokes about being broke, about being divorced, about all my failures, using comedy to hide from the pain instead of healing it, and I realized that sometimes the best thing we can do for someone is show them they don't have to perform their pain anymore. 6 months later, Kevin Hart would dedicate his next comedy special to Steve Harvey. But more importantly, he would start a foundation for children who were bullied for their physical differences. The foundation's first scholarship program, funded entirely by the money Kevin made from auctioning off Steve Harvey's jacket, which he had worn to every major event since that day. The jacket became more than a piece of clothing. It became a symbol of the moment, when comedy stopped and humanity began. When entertainment took a back seat to empathy. When two men, one tall and one short, proved that the biggest thing about a person isn't their stature, it's their willingness to be vulnerable enough to grow. And Steve Harvey? He still keeps a picture from that day in his dressing room. Not the professional photo from the show, but a candid shot someone took of him kneeling down to Kevin's level. Below it, a note in Kevin's handwriting: "Thank you for helping me stand tall." Because sometimes the most important moments happen when we stop trying to be bigger than we are and start embracing exactly who we are. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the permission to stop performing and start healing. And sometimes a game show host jacket becomes the perfect fit for a heart that was always giant-sized. The episode, when it aired 3 months later, became the most watched celebrity Family Feud in history, not because of the celebrity guests or the comedy, but because millions of people recognized themselves in Kevin Hart's moment of truth and Steve Harvey's act of grace. Today, whenever new comedians ask Kevin Hart for advice about dealing with insecurity, he tells them the same thing Steve Harvey told him. Your pain doesn't have to be your punchline. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take off the mask and let people see the person behind the performer. Because that's what love looks like. That's what courage sounds like. And that's what happens when someone finally gives you permission to stop being small and start being whole.